Hi everybody, this is Stephanie from MEFA. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Hopefully everybody should be able to hear me okay. So we just did a quick sound check before I went live, so you should be able to hear me okay. I do have everybody on mute, so we'll go through some housekeeping details in a minute and get started. Just wanted to say hello. We'll get started in 3 minutes. Good evening, everybody. This is Stephanie Wells from MEFA. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great program scheduled for you. We do have a few folks who are still logging in, so before we get started, just want to go over a couple housekeeping details. Everybody is on mute, so if you have a question, please type those in the chat feature. You should see a copy of the PowerPoint slides in your handout section of your toolbar. So if you need a copy of those, that's right there, so that you don't have to write down all the websites. You'll have that. And everybody is on mute. We're going to get started. So here is the toolbar that you see, just a couple housekeeping details about how this works. As I mentioned, you can't speak. We have to do everything through chat so that there's no background noise, but you do have that handout. And we also will be recording this webinar so that everybody that registered can see it again, and those who couldn't make it tonight will be able to view it. And so with that said, we're going to get started. So let me just get this started for us right here. Hold on one second. Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce our guest speaker tonight. We have a great colleague and friend of ours at MEFA who has done lots of programs in our community, and she's done lots of seminars. Her name is Amy, and I am going to let Amy introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself before she gets started.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for the introduction, Stephanie, and I'm looking forward to imparting a little bit of knowledge on the financial aid process. I am currently the coordinator of financial aid at Greenfield Community College here in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And I have a pretty extensive resume in colleges and universities. Before I worked in financial aid, I've worked in residence life, I've worked in college athletics, and I've worked in various types of administration over 25 years. And I even have a retired college professor for a father. So I was back on college campuses as young as 3 years old. And my job at GCC, I coordinate mostly outreach to families. If you're listening in from Western Massachusetts, we may have met before. I go to high schools and I work with families in my office, working on counseling, financial literacy, and helping to plan for college. So this presentation and working with MEFA is one of my favorite parts of my job, and I'm looking forward to being with you tonight.
Thank you, Amy. And we also just want to reiterate, feel free to type questions in the chat feature, and I will be helping Amy with those questions. I'll be throwing out some questions to her throughout the webinar, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. So feel free, if you have questions throughout, just type those in the chat feature. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Amy.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Stephanie. I think if we've done what we're supposed to do, I am now presenting to you, and I should be able to advance the slides. Let's see how it goes. Doesn't look like I'm advancing the slides yet. Let's see. I don't see, Stephanie, you're gonna have to help me. I do not see the PowerPoint anymore. I'm sorry. Sorry for the delay, everyone. I'm looking for the slideshow and the ability to advance it as soon as we get there. We will get to the presentation. I still can't see anything. I don't know what I have done wrong. I don't see the screen at all, Stephanie. I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I still don't have my slideshow up here. As soon as I get the slideshow going, we will begin.
Amy, where it says staff, if you want to just give me back control of the presentation, I can do that for you.
All right, hang on. Here we go.
Just go to staff and make me the presenter.
I am trying. It is not. I think I did it. Did I give it to you?
No.
I'm on staff. It still show me as the presenter though. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah, just click on the little down arrow
Yep.
and make me the presenter.
I don't see that option. I
It's
see
on the
me.
toolbar on the side of the screen.
Yep. Yep, I'm there. I see myself. Stop sharing web. Oh, wait. Hold on. Make presenter. Sorry, there it is.
Okay, great. All right. So I will, if it's all right with you, Amy, I'll just go ahead and advance the
Advance the
slide.
slide. Well, there's a joke in Western Mass about me that I'm practically Amish, so I'm sure that's why I'm having trouble with this. So I will let you advance the slides for you. We can already go on to the next slide. And again, I appreciate everyone's patience and I apologize for that. We're going to let Stephanie do the hard work for me.
We did practice this before we get on, folks, so sorry about that.
Sorry.
So I can cover this one, just a little bit about MEFA. So MEFA was created in 1982. We are a nonprofit quasi-state authority. So we do a lot of great work for the community. We have lots of these webinars going on right now, every day, Monday through Thursday, through the first week of November, because unfortunately we're unable to be in the community. So I'll let Amy take it from here.
Sure. So in tonight's session, we're going to talk about a handful of things related to how you apply for and receive financial aid and how it is applicable to the process for paying for the bill that comes from the college. We're going to talk about the different types and sources of aid, how the application process works, how decisions are made at the institutions, how you can actually pay for college with financial aid and other resources. And then other free resources that you can access will be at the end of the presentation. Moving right along now. You can go ahead one more. There we go. So what is financial aid? We're talking about assistance paying for college. It's referred to as money, although I like to call it, in my line of work, I like to call it funny money, because we're not actually giving out any funds. We are helping you to determine as a student and as a family eligibility for funding, and then applying that funding to your student bill. And there's three main types. There are grants and scholarships, or gift aid, what I refer to often as free money. There is federal work study. We'll talk a little bit more later about how work study works, but in general, you should understand that a student earning work study is working a job on campus where they have been hired into that job, and the grant that they receive in federal or college work study funds is earned by them in a paycheck for the hours that they work in that job. And then the final piece is the piece that everybody wants to talk about, and it's always in the news, and that's federal student loans. That's money that has to be repaid when the student is no longer in school. We can go on to the next one. Okay, sources of financial aid. Where does it come from? This is a condensed version of this presentation than what I would normally give in person, but I like how this slide is set up here. You can see there are some quadrants, 4 quadrants here, we'll call them. You've got the federal government, you've got the state or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In the bottom left corner there, you've got the college or university that the student is attending. And then really when we're talking about scholarships, we're talking about funding from third parties, or as it's referred to here, other agencies. So let's do that one first and get it out of the way. Scholarships are what I like to call a student-driven process. So when you do the FAFSA, A scholarship that you apply for separately may use that FAFSA information later on. But when you're applying for scholarships, you're actually going out and looking for funding that is on the student to apply for. It's going to have a separate application from the FAFSA. It's going to have a separate timeline. It's going to have other requirements that you have to do, you have to fulfill in order to earn the scholarship money. So that's how scholarships work. We'll kind of get that one out of the way. Let's go back up to the yellow box, the federal government. Most of the funding for college, when you're applying through the FAFSA, comes from the federal government. And what we're talking about is grants, like we said before, free money for school, work study, that's when you're working in a job and earning grant money in a paycheck. Then the student loans and tax incentives that go usually to parents who have students in college are also a part of the federal funding for education. You can learn more about all of these at studentaid.gov, which will also easily get you to the FAFSA, which is an online process as well. And then in Massachusetts, there's an entity called OSFA, the Office of Student Financial Assistance. I highly recommend that every family take a look at what OSFA has to offer in terms of funding for college. I believe the total number of different grant, loan, and scholarship programs through the state of Massachusetts is up to about 42 programs now. So it's a very complex set of different funding sources that come from the state, all with different requirements and how you become eligible for them. And then colleges, universities, at last in the bottom left corner there, what we call institutional aid is an institution may give a student grants, scholarships, loans. All of that. Loans is much less common. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of these, but you should understand that when you're looking at and you're comparing schools, that you're going to get different information about eligibility when you're talking about what's coming from the college or the university in the form of institutional aid. Let me see if I can advance on my own here. Nope. There we go. The most important thing to talk about, as far as I'm concerned, as a financial aid administrator, someone who works with families every day figuring out how to afford college, are talking about the student loan program. So the FAFSA is the application for federal student loans. And you'll hear me throughout this presentation. I'm going to gently kind of rag on the federal government a little bit. They like to confuse people. And one of the things that is very confusing about the student loan program is its names. Its names, yes, plural names. So it's been called in previous iterations the Stafford Loan Program. Some of the parents out there may remember it being called Stafford Loans. Now it's called Federal Direct Loans. It may in the future have different names, and they're all interchangeable. And most folks in the business just refer to them as student loans. And when we're talking about them, we're talking about two types. This slide is about federal loans. There also are private loans, which we'll touch on just a little bit later, that are not through the FAFSA process. What you should understand about loans through the federal government and through the FAFSA is that the student is the borrower of the loans. By filling out the FAFSA, the student is applying for loan eligibility. And when the student is no longer in school, it's the student's responsibility to repay those loans. There's no credit check for these loans. The check that is done before the funding is paid is about whether or not the student is enrolled. Are they actually taking classes? If yes, then you can pay the money. And there's two types, subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized has to do with the interest rate, and it's an income eligible thing. So on the FAFSA, it can be determined whether or not a student is eligible or not for a subsidized loan. When it's subsidized, the interest rate on the loan is being paid by the federal government while the student is still in school for at least half time or 6 credits a term. Unsubsidized, as the name suggests, is not income-based. Anyone pretty much can be eligible for an unsubsidized loan. And in that case, the interest rate that is accruing the entire time the student is in school and when they're in repayment. For this academic year, the interest rate is very low, 2.75%. Yes, it does change every year. And I'm going to rag on the federal government again, believe it or not, it's Congress that sets the interest rate every year for federal student loans. So I like to joke that Elizabeth Warren has more control over what you're paying for college than I do, but that's just a simple way of saying it. It's much more complicated than that. And then let's talk a little bit about repayment. You're not repaying loans while you're in school at least half time. There are multiple repayment options with the federal loan program. It makes it much more attractive than private loans. When you borrow from a bank or you borrow from Sallie Mae, you may have different and less flexible repayment when you enter repayment. And let's look at this simple example here. So a total borrowed for 4 years of $27,000, which that's about average. Between 27 and 32,000 is right now about the average that a student will borrow for a 4-year degree. You can see that in entering repayment, if you choose a 10-year repayment plan and can afford $300 a month, you would have that loan paid off. I won't get too much into the terms around loans, deferment, forbearance, forgiveness, but there are different ways to manage the debt while you're in repayment that help you if you were to lose a job or need to go back to school to be retrained, or if you're working in public service, there's some forgiveness opportunities. The piece of this slide that I really want to focus on, however, is the little grid there with the annual loan limits. And the reason I like to talk about this is because I meet so many families who make an assumption that if they need to borrow, if their student needs to borrow $10,000 as a freshman to be able to make the bill, be able to afford the school that they've chosen, that they'll be able to borrow that through the federal student loan program. And that is not how the program works. The program has maximums for a 4-year degree, and it also has maximums that you can borrow per year. And I want to make sure that if you take anything away from this presentation, that this be one of the things you kind of remember. A first-year student or a freshman student can borrow from the direct loan program a total of $5,500, and $3,500 of that is the maximum that can be subsidized. So even if you're eligible for a subsidy for the full $5,500 based on income, you can't get that because the federal government says the maximum subsidy is $3,500. So if you borrow the maximum as a freshman, $2,000 of that borrowing will be accruing interest the entire time you're in school. And you notice that it increases by $1,000 for your second year, and then it stays the same. It increases again, but stays the same for junior and senior year. And I think it's important to point out when there's clear issues with how this program works, to say it gently. These limits, so I mentioned earlier, I've worked in financial aid for over 15 years now. These limits haven't changed in the whole time I've worked in financial aid, even though college has gotten much more expensive. The federal government says the family's responsibility is the #1 responsibility for paying for college, so that could be the reason why here. The other piece of that is if a student is borrowing from only the federal student loan program, their borrowing amount will be what I like to call responsible for earning a 4-year degree, as long as they're passing their classes. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's a little bit about the student loan program and how it works. And I, of course, will be happy to answer questions about that at the end. Remember, you can put questions in the chat. And that is often something I get a lot of questions about during this presentation. And Stephanie, I'm ready for the next slide. Merit-based aid. Okay, merit-based aid is about student achievement. It's about individual eligibility based on a talent. Maybe an athlete would get a merit-based aid, or a very strong academic performer. Not every school has merit-based aid. For example, my school, Greenfield Community College, we don't do merit-based programs. Community colleges often don't do merit-based programs. The important thing, I'm not going to read through all these bullets. The important thing to understand about merit-based aid is how you keep it. So the first thing you would want to ask about a merit scholarship or a merit award that you see on an award letter for financial aid is it good for just that year? Is it good for all of the years that the student is at the institution? And how do you keep it in terms of grade level? You're making progress towards your degree, the GPA, and also it may be dependent upon a certain major or staying with an athletic program. And you want to understand how it is that you can maintain that award for the entire time that you're a student. They also may require a separate application. The way to find out about those things is definitely through the website for either the financial aid office or the admission office at the school you're considering. And the application deadlines may be earlier than other deadlines you would expect for the college itself. So you want to make sure you're on top of those things. We can go on to the next slide. Need-based aid. This is really what the FAFSA system and the financial aid system is built on. And we're going to talk pretty extensively about how the federal government determines need. And you'll see it there in the first bullet, it's in quotes. And I would highly recommend that when you talk about need for your student, you put it in quotes, because you'll see as we talk through this, that it's not always what families expect or actually want the program to be. So we're looking at a family's financial profile to determine need. Every FAFSA that is filed is put through the exact same formula to create a baseline, basically for all students. And that's the starting point for determining need. All of the different aid programs are included in need. And most of the financial aid, I think I already said this, is need-based that you'll encounter by applying, whether it's through the FAFSA or through scholarships or through the college itself for institutional aid. Satisfactory academic progress. I do like to spend just a little bit of time on this. That's the last bullet there. As a community college financial aid person, I spend a lot of time on satisfactory academic progress. And what does this mean? It basically means that to continue to be eligible for financial aid throughout your college career, you have to be making progress towards a degree. Or in very simple terms, pass your classes, pass them with a C or better, so that you maintain eligibility for aid as you work towards the degree. There is, in my opinion, nothing worse about especially borrowing loans than not making progress toward your degree, because you're still going to have to pay those loans back, whether you earn the degree or not. We can go on to the next slide. Application process. Yep, let's go ahead. Go to one more. Thank you, Stephanie. The timeline. So every school is going to be different. The FAFSA stays the same. We'll talk about that in a bit. Every school has different deadlines, and they may have a financial aid application in addition to the FAFSA, which we'll also talk about in some detail later. Early action, early decision. I've never worked in admission, so I'm going to talk like I know what I'm talking about, but you want to talk to the admission folks at your school to make sure that you understand. Early action and early decision, where you're saying, this is the school I want to go to. As long as I get in, I'm not going to apply to any others or decide on any other school. Those deadlines could be as early as this month or November. That's pretty typical. And then for the standard admission process, you're really looking at having applications due typically in February, sometimes March. don't be late. I'm going to tell you, don't be late on admission applications. Don't be late on your FAFSA. Don't be late on turning paperwork in. Deadlines are a wonderful thing to learn in college. I hope every student out there who's listening tonight learns about the importance of deadlines when you're an adult. It's an excellent practice when you're in college to make deadlines. And then MEFA has a great tool on their website, the College Application Manager, that you can use. I find that many students and families right now, if you're looking at starting in fall of 2021 in your first year of college, are still considering 10 to 12 different schools at this point. The College Application Manager tool that MEFA has helps you keep all of those deadlines and the application details organized. So I highly recommend checking that out and using it if it works for your system. We can go to the next slide. The FAFSA. Okay, this is what really is your key to understanding how this process works. FAFSA is an acronym, stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The federal government has done a really good job in recent years in making sure that families are not wandering onto a site that is not the real FAFSA site that will actually charge you to fill out your FAFSA. Yes, they do exist, but please just make sure you're on the government site when you fill it out, FAFSA.gov. If your school that you're considering for college doesn't accept the FAFSA, my news for you is it's not a real college. Choose somewhere else. That's a really important thing to understand. All colleges use the FAFSA. It's become available already on October 1st, last week, for the 2021-2022 academic year that starts in after July 1 of 2021. And so you can go in there and fill it out now. One thing I will say here is that if you go into FAFSA.gov right now, you're going to have the choice to fill out the FAFSA for the current academic year, 2020, 2021. And you also will have the choice to do the one for next year. Just make sure you're doing the correct FAFSA. Just take a minute to read and select the right FAFSA. It will default to the one for next year at this point. There also, for the last, I think, 3 years, has been a mobile app that you can put on your phone and you can do the FAFSA. As I mentioned, I'm practically Amish. I haven't tried the mobile app, but I do have students that have used it, and that's their preferred way to use it. And it seems to be very smooth and very accessible for folks. So if that's more comfortable for you, I recommend doing that. Let's really pay attention to this next piece, because the FAFSA does not do this piece for you. This is something called the FSA ID. You're going to first, before you do the FAFSA, both the parent, we'll talk about which parent, and the student are going to apply for an FSA ID. You're actually going to choose your own username. You're going to choose your own password. You're going to answer some questions on a website for the federal government about who you are. You're going to set up some security questions. And once the government has confirmed that, yep, you are who you say you are, you can use the FSA ID, the username and password that you've created. And again, both the student and the parent need one. And I'll lecture just for a minute here. We have so many well-meaning parents, especially moms, and I'm a mom myself, I understand, who want to do the FSA ID for themselves and do it for their student. And inevitably, that can lead to confusion and problems. Putting the wrong social security number, for example, in the application for the FSA ID will really kind of mess it up almost forever. So I definitely recommend, no matter how many eye rolls you get from your student, that you sit down and you do them, but you do separate ones. Do it together, but do separate ones. Make sure you each have one. I tell my students to put their FSA ID in their phone or somewhere they're definitely going to be able to access it again, because you need it every year. When you go to do the FAFSA for 2022, 2023, you're going to need the same FSA ID, but nowhere on the FAFSA does it tell you to save that password. So that's my little tip. Within the FAFSA itself, there's something called the data retrieval tool. This is a fancy thing that you actually use your FSA ID to verify within the FAFSA that you still are who you said you are, and it takes you out to the IRS and it grabs your tax information or the parent tax information, student or parent or both, and it pulls the information that it needs directly into the FAFSA, into the correct field that is needed for that information. And it does not allow you to change that information once it's in there. It's a really convenient tool, so you're not struggling with tax paperwork and worrying about if you're putting the right information in the right field. MEFA has a FAFSA webinar recording that you can check on the their events page. If you're unsure of that, I highly recommend just taking a few minutes to go through that webinar. It's definitely worth it. And the FAFSA has to be done every year. So if you think about it as like, I used to tell people to do it on Super Bowl Sunday, but they've changed the deadline. The deadlines, or the accessibility, it's now earlier. You can do it in October. So maybe do it on Thanksgiving, something like that. That's plenty of time to have it into the schools. And you have to do it every year, so get used to doing it the whole time you're in college or you're thinking you might be in college.
Thank you, Amy. I also wanted to add about the deadlines for early action and early decision. Those are typically November 1st, December 15th for admissions and financial aid. So
financial aid.
Yep. So some schools, if the November 1st deadline for early action, for example, the financial aid deadline might be November 1st as well, or it might be a week or two later. So like Amy said earlier, check out that MEFA organizer or bring your own spreadsheet just to know what does every school need from me for forms, which Amy's going to talk about right now, and what are the deadlines, not just for admissions, but also financial aid. And I'm going to go back on mute.
Thank you, Stephanie. So what are you reporting on the FAFSA? There's a bunch of just what I call demographic information about the student and the parent. Obviously, name, birthday, social security number. When the parent is a non-citizen, you can still fill out the FAFSA and put all zeros for the social security number. And there's an option within the FAFSA whenever you run into trouble that you can't get an FSA ID for some reason or can't get it signed successfully, you are able at the end to print a signature page and sign it, the student and the parent, and then send it in to the FAFSA folks, or we recommend to our students at GCC to actually drop it off to us and we take care of it. And then once the FAFSA is, or when you're filling out the FAFSA, you can add up to 10 colleges to receive that FAFSA. And this is where I get a little bit on my soapbox as an administrator who says, I've seen this movie before. And I mentioned the folks who, you've got a dozen colleges that you're considering. What you want to remember is it's never too early to start whittling down those choices, because let's say you need to do follow-up on something that is requested as a part of the FAFSA. You're going to have to do that follow-up with all 10 schools that you have listed there. So you just want to make it as simple as possible, as quickly as possible. Keep your choices open, but don't leave something on there and do follow-up for a school that you're not going to attend. In terms of parent information, they're looking for basically who is in your household, which is the bottom number there. Who's in your household, the number of people in the household, who are the income earners in your household, what's the marital status of the parents in the household, and then a point that's really important to make here about families that there's been a divorce or separation of the biological parents of the child. When you're doing the FAFSA, the custodial parent, so a parent that has 51% of, I know this is generate a question, which is why I'm doing it, 51% custody, and their current spouse. So if the biological parents of the student are divorced and mom is going to do the FAFSA and mom is remarried, mom's information as well as mom's current spouse goes on to the FAFSA. And this can be confusing for many families, and we can absolutely answer questions about it if you have them. Last thing there, if a student is in legal guardianship, legal guardians are not parents. A student in legal guardianship is going to fill out the FAFSA as if they are what we call an independent student. Independent students don't have parent information required on the FAFSA. I think we can go on to the next slide.
Amy, can you also just talk about the number of folks in the household and number of children in college?
Oh, sure. Yes. So
and particularly for the number of children in college, how that might impact the family contribution, which you're going to talk about in a minute.
So the more kids in the family that are in college, the less contribution of family income and assets is going to go to each child's expected family contribution. We're going to get to that in a second. But if you have 3 kids in college, you're going to be expected to pay less out of pocket as a family than if you only have 1 kid in college. Is probably the easiest way to explain it. And then who is in your household? This can also be confusing. If a 19-year-old college student is living on their own and not living with their parents, but their parents are still alive and they will need to actually be on the FAFSA included in the household. So number in household can be confusing when a student lives on their own. But by and large, the rule of thumb for the federal government is if you are under the age of 24, you will have to have parent information on your FAFSA. Legal guardianship is one of the exemptions there. There are a few others, like if you have been in foster care after age 13, there's a handful of others. If folks have specific questions about exemptions from providing parent information, we can go over those as questions. So what's reported on the FAFSA in terms of financial information? This is what everybody always wants to talk about. So for the FAFSA we're talking about now, for 2021, 2022, parent and student income, we're looking for tax information from 2019. No, this is not a typo. It goes back 2 years. And I can't tell you how often I work with families that have actually assumed that the FAFSA had a typo in it and they provide tax information from the wrong year. But what we're actually looking for is tax information from 2 years previous. We're also looking for untaxed income, and that there actually are questions, a series of questions about untaxed income, which may be something like child support. And then in terms of assets, again, another thing that is very common with questions. You do include cash on hand, is what I like to call it, savings, checking, other investments, like something like a CD. And then you also include 529 plans. There was a time, not way back, but there was a time previously when 529 plans were sometimes in the student's name, sometimes in a grandparent's name, sometimes in the parent's name. They really should be in the parent's name. They are counted as a parent asset on the FAFSA. And it is really important that you understand that you get any sort of tax advice that you need about those assets now so that you can fill out the FAFSA correctly. And then what also surprises people pretty regularly about the FAFSA is that you don't need to include your primary residence as an asset. You don't need to include retirement as an asset. And then small family businesses are also not included. And then only in terms of debt, people will say to me all the time, well, I have a ton of credit card debt. FAFSA doesn't count that. Debt on assets is the only piece that you would actually be including on the FAFSA. I freely admit this is my least favorite slide, people. Okay, other financial aid applications. This is not something I know anything about when we're talking about the CSS profile. What I will tell you is that about 320 colleges and universities of the more competitive and selective type in the United States require an additional financial aid application called the CSS Profile. You should be checking now the schools you're considering applying to see, do they also require the profile in addition to the FAFSA? It's not all schools. If you go to that CSS Profile link there, or you go to the college's website, they will tell you if they take the profile or not. It is not free. $25 for the first school, $16 for each additional school. The timeline's the same. It's already available for the next academic year. And what's different from the FAFSA is that even the non-custodial parent has to answer income and asset information. So it's more in-depth, and I believe it also looks at more years of tax information than the FAFSA does. MEFA has a ton of resources about the profile that I recommend you access through the events page and through the resources on their website. And then a lot of colleges require a separate, like an internal financial aid application. Even Greenfield Community College we have our own financial aid application that's basically just like, yep, I'm really coming. I put you on my FAFSA, and this is really where I'm going to enroll. It can be as simple as that, but you should know whether or not the institution you're attending requires that additional application.
Thank you, Amy. And I'll also add that, making sure that you're on top of what forms the schools need. The profile is one that many schools, particularly private colleges, will require. So it's important to be doing that research on the college's website about what financial aid forms they'll need. And the benefit of the profile is that you might be eligible for more additional financial aid from the college itself. So the schools that require the profile typically have more financial resources. They're your, private.
That's absolutely true. Yes.
So it's a good idea to do that. And I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Stephanie's here to remind me that the profile can be a good thing, and I will keep my bias to myself. After you apply, okay, so you've done the FAFSA, you've hit submit, you get a little screen that says your FAFSA has been submitted successfully and is in process. And the student will immediately get an email that says exactly the same thing. The FAFSA has been submitted and it's in process. That processing period takes a couple of days usually, and you can't make any changes to the FAFSA at that point, and it's also not yet been received by the institutions you've requested that it go to. The schools will get it after you get a second email that looks almost exactly like the first one, because it's the federal government and they like to confuse us, and that one will say, your FAFSA has been processed successfully. All that means is they're sending it to the schools that you told them to send it to. Once it's sent to the schools, the determination of eligibility and the awarding of aid and anything in between there is the responsibility of the school. They pass it off at that point, and the schools make the determination based on the outlined regulations from the federal government. You will, as a student, get an email about the student aid report, or the SAR. It's basically just your receipt for your FAFSA. I think they used to email it as an attachment, and I think now they actually email instructions on how to log into it on the FAFSA site, which is a little bit more secure because it does have financial information on it. If you are a family, and there were a lot of them before COVID-19, there are going to be more of them now that have special circumstances. I mentioned that your tax information for the FAFSA we're talking about now goes back 2 years. Your circumstances as a family from 2 years ago may be vastly different from what they are now. In that case, you are going to contact individual financial aid offices and ask how they manage special circumstances. You basically say, I've done my FAFSA, you should have it. It's not reflective of my family's current ability to pay for college, and I would like to be considered for special circumstances. Every school has to have a process for that. They have to allow you to do that by regulation, but their process from school to school can be vastly different with vastly different timelines and requirements. So you want to make sure you're on top of that early. And again, just to go back to my little soapbox, all the more reason to start to narrow down how many schools you're actually seriously considering, because you would have to do that at all 10 schools if you're considering 10 schools. Verification. Let's just talk quickly about verification. About a third of all the FAFSAs submitted are selected for verification. I can pretty much guarantee you, if you don't use, as a family, you're a tax filer, you don't use the data retrieval tool to put the tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA. If you do it manually, you're more likely to be selected for verification. When that happens, there'll be follow-up from the individual institutions, the college you're considering, with instructions on how to submit verification information. It's basically your tax information, parent tax information, student tax information, and then a worksheet that you would complete. Because if you didn't know already, financial aid offices love forms. We have lots of them, and we love to make you fill them out. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the colleges are reviewing applications, making determinations of eligibilities, and actually awarding the financial aid at each institution. So it's likely your aid package at each institution is going to look different from another one. Oh, more on verification. Somehow forgot the slide was in here. Okay. So if I identify that a student is selected for verification by the federal government, or I need to select a student at the college level, which I can do because there's appear to be discrepancies in information, we will start that process. And in order to receive any financial aid, the verification process has to be completed, which means the family has to submit all the documents that are requested, and they have to be reviewed and processed before the aid can be awarded. Typically, it's tax returns and the worksheet that I talked about. There may also be additional information required about assets if it's unclear from the FAFSA and from the rest of the income and asset information. There might be additional information requested. Please make sure that as a student, you're opening your mail from all the colleges. That's US mail, opening the mail, the envelopes that you get from all the colleges you're considering attending, and that you know how to log in to their online portal for communications. For example, my institution that I work at, we don't send letters to students about requesting verification information. We expect that the student is logging into the web portal provided by the college and reviewing the requirements we've put out there for them and following up on them based on that web portal information. So it's really important that a student is checking that portal regularly for updates about financial aid status. Oh, learn about your financial aid office. I will just say this. We are all here to help. Financial aid people are professionals. We are not doing this for the money. We love to help people. Like myself, I enjoy identifying for families the different options and opportunities that they have. You want to make sure that you get to know the people in the office, get to know the different options that are there for aid. We talked about special circumstances, but any other questions you have, maybe it's about academic progress and how that impacts your financial aid. Maybe it's about dropping a class. There can be lots of reasons why financial aid is impacted by some decision a student makes, and you may not always expect that. How to contact the financial aid office right now? Honestly, email is the best way. Many of campuses are still operating entirely remotely. Email not only gives you and the office a record of what was discussed, but it also is pretty convenient for folks to be able to check remotely. We do have, many schools have chat functions if you're comfortable with that. And you may get lucky and you may get someone in the office who's picking up a phone call as well. But we're here to help, and it's important that we have that you make a relationship with your financial aid office so we can understand your family's unique circumstances.
Thank you, Amy. I also just want to reiterate what Amy said about reaching out to the financial aid office about the special circumstances. Remember, you're putting in 2019 information on the FAFSA form. 2020 was a much different year than what you're going to be reporting for 2019 for many families. Many have lost their job because of the pandemic or been furloughed or reduction in income. So make sure that you're reaching out to the college if you're struggling and have any of these special circumstances. They're expecting you to do so.
Yep.
You do want to make sure you reach out to them.
Such a good point, Stephanie. It's such a good point. Thank you.
So right here, Amy, I just want to take, I know we're closing in on the hour. We're trying to get this in under an hour, but it's almost impossible to get all this information out in an hour.
Especially when I don't know what I'm doing at the beginning.
Yeah, that was mostly my fault. I do want to stop just for a couple of questions.
Sure. This is my favorite part. The questions are my favorite part.
Okay, great. So does the timing, if a parent has an FSA ID from a couple of years ago, do they need to create a new one or can they use the same one?
What a great question. No, it should be the same one. And you actually can go to the FSA ID site, and when you go to fsaid.ed.gov, what you'll see there is a tab for Create My FSA ID, and then a tab immediately behind it that says Manage My FSA ID. So if you don't remember if you have one, or you don't remember the password, you can go to Manage My FSA ID and basically just use the email address you think you used, and it will help you to identify whether or not you have one. And if you don't remember the password, you can reset it there. But FSA IDs right now are kind of a for life thing until the federal government determines that they want to use a different method for having students authenticate who they are. That's a great question.
Great, and I have another good one. If a parent is divorced but got remarried in 2020, do they include their new spouse in the 2019 income?
So here's what's gonna happen. There's so many slices and dices about stuff like this. So the FAFSA has a number of questions related to marital status and who's in the household, and it is able to determine what you would actually say as the parent is your marital status is the choice of married/remarried. That's one of the options. And then you're going to give your month and year of the remarriage for the new spouse in the next field. And the FAFSA will know at that point. I can't remember what exactly it does now. It changes every year. You used to not be able to use the data retrieval tool from the IRS. I believe now you can still use it. Your FAFSA is flagged with a mismatch on the tax year and the marital status, and then the financial aid office that is receiving the FAFSA will follow up and actually request the tax information for the new spouse from the year when they were not yet married. It's very confusing, but that is how it will work. It is going to be expected that even if the marriage is brand new and after the tax year being requested, they will look for income and asset information from the parent and the new spouse.
Great, thank you, Amy. And I'm going to throw one more question out and then we'll keep going.
Sure.
We do have a few more, but we'll just do one more right now. So when you're filling out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, the answer is going to be the same. Does the student have access to the information that's on that form? You know, if a parent, for example, doesn't want the student to see their financials.
That's a good question. Okay, so if you use the data retrieval tool, you can no longer see the field on the FAFSA when you're filling it out, but you will be able to see that income and asset information on, I briefly talked about the SAR, or the student aid report. And you would also be able to see it potentially if you log in to make, again, because you can go back into the FAFSA to update and make corrections at any time after it's been processed. And you may be able to see it at that point, depending upon the type of correction you're making. And certainly if you're not able to use the data retrieval tool and you manually enter the tax information, it will be seen by whoever has access to the FAFSA itself, so the student and the parent.
Great. Thank you, Amy. We're going to keep going.
Okay. Now we get into the sticky financial aid stuff. Cost of attendance can also be called budget. It's basically the total cost for 1 year of college. And we've got some color-coded stuff here. The billed or direct expenses are in blue there, and the non-billed or indirect expenses are in yellow. If you didn't already know it, college is expensive, and both of these rows, the blue row and the yellow row, have things that are unexpected and things that are expensive. Tuition and fees and room and board, they're pretty much going to be, pretty different from school to school. But let's say you have twins and you send them both to UMass Amherst, you may find that their charges for tuition and fees and room and board are identical. You may find that they're different. Books and supplies. I like to spend just a tad bit of time on books and supplies. People get worked up all the time about how expensive books are. They are expensive. If you're a full-time student, you should plan for $1,000 in books and supplies each semester. The good news about that is that the cost of books and supplies really hasn't changed in like 40 years. I went to school 30 plus years ago, college, and it was $1,000 a semester as a full-time student. So that does not change. And in fact, it's actually gotten a little better because you can rent books, you can get them new, you can return them in at the end of the semester, and many professors are using now open source material that doesn't cost anything at all. So books and supplies, you should estimate $1,000. Sometimes you'll be surprised and it'll be less per semester. Transportation, remember that if you go to school in Alabama, they're not going to let you stay in your residence hall, in your dorm, when it's closed for Thanksgiving or closed for January or closed for the summer. You got to have somewhere to go. That's where transportation costs come in. That's something the family discusses about what's reasonable. Whether you need airfare or you need a bus back and forth from Boston, whatever it may be, transportation is a real expense. If you're a commuter, it's certainly an expense. A place like UMass Amherst, which is a huge campus, they are charging students for a sticker to put in their car so they can park on campus. And you want to understand what that cost is. And then personal expenses could be anything. Could be getting a slice of pizza while you're studying. It could be unexpected costs that come up related to just about any portion of going to college. And these are cost of attendance. This is set by the school. It's required to be set by every school by the federal government in order to participate in financial aid programs. The big number. Expected family contribution, or EFC, is what we call it in the financial aid world. This is basically the amount a family has the ability to pay for 1 year of college costs for one student, for one of their students in college. I think I mentioned this earlier, every family, FAFSA goes through the same formula. And just like the federal government, you fill out 150 questions on the FAFSA, and at the end, it spits out one number. You give them all this information and you get back just one number. And that one number is the expected family contribution. When you hit submit on that FAFSA, you will see it on that page that comes up that says you've submitted your FAFSA successfully. That calculation has already happened, and you will see your EFC there as long as there's not a problem with the data in the FAFSA. Some colleges also use an institutional EFC. I'm not going to get too into that. If folks have specific questions about that, Stephanie's going to help me out later. I've never worked at an institution that uses what we call that institutional methodology for the EFC. As I mentioned before, the whole financial aid process through the federal government is predicated on the expectation the family has the primary responsibility for paying. That doesn't mean the college is going to send the dad a check or a bill for the EFC amount. If your EFC is $15,000, nobody is going to send you a bill for that $15,000 and expect you to cough it up. But in the next few slides, you'll see how that works. We mentioned already that the EFC gets lower if there's more than one child in college. And so MEFA and IFAP. IFAP's like a financial aid thing. Don't go to IFAP, go to MEFA. IFAP's for financial aid people. You can see the EFC calculator. It's a very confusing, you can go ahead and advance it. EFC is a very confusing thing that is not for the faint of heart to try and figure out how it works. And then the real formula here that we're talking about is, what is a student eligible for? What money are they eligible for through this process to help pay for school? And the way that's determined looks kind of simple. Cost of attendance minus EFC equals eligibility. So I'm not great at math, so we'll do a simple calculation here. Cost of attendance is $40,000. The expected family contribution is $20,000. The eligibility for aid is $20,000. And then the college gets that information, gets that FAFSA, and finds what I like to call the buckets of money that the student is eligible for to fill in the aid that the student can receive. Seems simple on that slide. Oh, yes. I love this one. Do you mind, Stephanie, just advancing all the little pieces of the barrel here for me so I can talk about it all at once? That's my preferred way. Thank you. Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite slides. We'll spend a little bit of time on it. How awarding works. So we've got a college here with a cost of attendance of $45,000 a year. That's pretty, if you're talking about especially big public schools, four-year schools, and larger, and most private colleges, 45 and up is about what you're looking at in terms of 1 year of college. And what the real important thing to look at here is to look at the bottom row for EFC, and then also look at the top row of unmet need. Just because a student is eligible for the funds doesn't mean the funds exist to give to them. And that's really the baseline of this slide here. So we've got a family's EFC of $5,000. That's on the bottom row there. And there's a grant aid of $17,500 from the school, or maybe from the federal government, doesn't tell there. And then the students received a $10,000 scholarship from some source. The maximum amount of student loans at $5,500 for the first year of school is in there. $2,000 in work study. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And this whole barrel here, you're still short $5,000 that is unmet in need. So even though the student is eligible for that additional $5,000 in aid, there isn't any money to give. And let's go back to the purple. Let's go back to the work study. What's really important for families to understand about work study: it is a grant, it's free money for college, but the student is earning it over the course of the academic year. It's not $2,000 that goes towards paying the bill. So you'll see work study on an award letter when the student sees what they're going to get from the college. Excuse me. Sorry about that. But you will not have that $2,000 go towards paying the billed charges that are going to come due typically in August and January. That was quick on that slide. If there's questions, that's okay, but we can go on to the next one. Oh, net price calculators. I don't like talking about net price calculators.
You want me to cover? I'll cover this one.
Here's what I want to say, and then you can cover it. Net price calculators are a federal government requirement of colleges. Whenever the federal government requires a college to do it, it's generally not a very good tool. And I'll let Stephanie explain the rest.
And I have a different take on it. So
okay, good.
If you want to put yourself on mute, Amy, I think we get feedback when we both have our mics on. Thanks. Sure. So net price calculators can be a really good tool to find out an estimate of what you might be receiving in financial aid from a school. So many state universities, state schools, schools like Amy's school, they're typically going to use the basic federal calculator, which really just tells you what your EFC is. It doesn't provide much more beyond that because typically public colleges don't have as much institutional resources or merit-based aid to provide, so they use a basic calculator. Now, with that said, for a lot of the private colleges, and this is particularly great for families who maybe have juniors or sophomores, when you're doing your research about colleges and you're trying to figure out, well, what am I going to owe? You want to take away some of that mystery before you actually apply for financial aid. These net price calculators are a great way to, just understand how the financial aid is calculated by seeing the questions that they're asking. And it also gives you a better idea of what you might pay. And some calculators also provide information about merit-based aid. So you put in your GPA and test scores, and you might get an estimate there. Now, they're not exact until you actually apply for financial aid. You really don't know exactly what you're going to get, but some of these calculators are so sophisticated, it will give you a very good idea. And I like the idea of these calculators because it can help families who are looking at, maybe an $80,000 a year school. You fill out the net price calculator, you realize, geez, I might be getting some financial aid from this school. Maybe we might be able to afford it. Let's apply. It can help you not take schools off the list because of that high sticker price. So it is a good resource. And it, like Amy said, it's required by the federal government. So the website for these net price calculators are going to be on the college's websites. You can just put in the search tool of each college's website, net price calculator, and you should be able to find it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Amy.
Thank you. That's a much rosier picture of the net price calculator than me. We make a good pair. Okay, let's talk about award letters. So what you have here are 3 colleges with the same cost of attendance of $4,500, an EFC that's the same of $5,000, and a total eligibility for aid, because cost of attendance minus EFC is aid eligibility of $40,000. And you've got 3 different colleges here offering their awards for the student. And you can look at and compare based on what you've learned about how this process works. You can see right away the student loans, it's the same at every school, it's the maximum amount. Work study, same thing, $2,000, same at every school. The grant and scholarship aid is what's different. And this is really a very typical way of comparing what's the better deal. Now, a student may say, I don't care, I really want to go to college C, and the parent may have the ability, because they've planned and they've saved and they've already talked about it, to pay that $15,000 a year that's going to be unmet and going to be the responsibility of the family. Or the family may have a discussion ahead of time, we can't afford to pay anything additional other than the EFC, and you're going to need to go to a school that's going to cover everything. So those are discussions that are helpful when you're looking at and comparing different award letters. This is a great slide, Stephanie. Much better than it's different than the old one, and I like it much better.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll go to the next one while you're talking, but I do want to just let everybody know that in the spring, you'll hear more about our after the college acceptance seminars. So high school seniors on the line, we have great resources at MEFA to help you analyze your award letters. So I'm going to let Amy finish this, but just know that there's going to be help for you so that you don't have to be worried that you're about what you're looking at on the award letters, because it can be a little confusing.
It can be confusing, and thank you for that. That's great. Okay, so the types of aid, as we've talked about, can vary quite a bit. We've got the same example here in terms of EFC and the cost of attendance and the aid eligibility. And I'll just break it down really quickly here. What you're seeing is that the amount of grants and scholarships is decreasing from college A to college C. And then the parent loan piece is skyrocketing. Parents can borrow loans. We haven't really talked about that. Parents can borrow federal loans. They have different repayments and different interest rates than the student loans. Parents can also borrow privately from financial institutions or directly from a lender like Sallie Mae. When you're looking at these award letters, the most important thing is to look at what is the expected amount the family is kicking in, student and parent combined. And that's what it's showing here, is your unmet need may look the same, but it's actually a very different dynamic for each of those schools.
And I'll also just pipe in here a little bit about the parent loan piece. MEFA also has low-cost family loans for families where parents can borrow, but because we are a nonprofit, our rates are a lot lower than some of the for-profit organizations, including the federal government. So if you see a parent loan, it would be a Federal Plus loan that a school might put on an award letter to make that bottom line look a little bit better, or to show you an example of how you might pay the bill. But you're not wedded to that. It's not financial aid. The parent loans are credit-based and they're not guaranteed. So I always advise families to add that parent loan piece to the bottom of what you owe and then create a strategy from there, which we'll get to in a second. And I know we're at 7:45, so we're well over time, so I'm going to keep going.
Here. Let's keep going. Okay, last pieces here. This is an example of how you would pay the bill. So yes, you will likely, in many instances, get a bill for $20,000 for a semester, and you have to figure out how you're going to pay it. So students can reasonably save from a part-time job $1,000 a summer to be able to help pay. Parents, let's say you have 2 kids and you've been saving for college and you've got about $35,000 saved up. That would be about $4,000 per student per year. You can look at it that way. Planning ahead in terms of the number of kids you have is super important. And then a payment plan is an option at, as far as I know, every school. So you can split the cost over the semester and sometimes over the whole academic year. So it could be a 3 or 4 month plan. It could be a 10-month plan for the payment. And a family with regular income may be able to do a payment plan and know that over the course of the semester, they can afford an additional $5,000. And then loans, $10,000 to fill in that gap there. And that would get your bill paid. One example, one very simple example.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I'll also add that some of the other resources that MEFA has available on our website are webinars about borrowing and analyzing different loans and comparing loan options. So you're not there yet to paying the bill. We're really focused on the application process, but we do have resources when it comes time to pay the bill at MEFA to help you understand the differences between different types of loans and how to be a smart shopper when you're looking at borrowing.
Yeah, this is my favorite slide. I said the barrel was my favorite slide. This is really my favorite slide. I work with families all the time that say, but I don't understand how we figure this out. And I work with students all the time who are traditional age college students. So they're 17 to 24 years of age. And I can assure you, a traditional age college student does not know intrinsically the difference between coming up with $4,000 in 30 days time for when the bill is due or $40,000 for when the bill is due. They just don't have the life experience to understand that. So talking about money, talking about what the family can afford, and setting an annual, this is what we can actually afford for your college attendance this year, and having that conversation regularly is super important. How many kids do you have? Does your kid plan on becoming a doctor? That's another, after undergrad, that's another at least 8 years of schooling. Yes, they will look for parent information on the FAFSA when you go to medical school, believe it or not, even if you're over the age of 24. And you want to just think about and plan about how long the student will be in school, how much the parent is able to contribute. That first bullet there, I work at a community college. What I like to say is very, very simply, getting your 4-year degree and starting at a community college is like getting it at a 75% off sale, because that's about how much you'll save by starting at a community college. And I'll leave it at that. But these are great questions to talk about with your spouse, to talk about with your kids. Mass transfer. Very quickly, mass transfer is a way that the public colleges in Massachusetts make it more affordable for a student to start at really any public college, start at a community college, and easily get to a 4-year degree. If you start at a community college in a mass transfer program and you earn that 2-year degree, the associate's degree, and you transfer to a public college or university in Massachusetts, you're guaranteed to transfer at junior status, and they will protect the credits that you are transferring in. And you may also, with mass transfer, qualify for frozen tuition, frozen tuition in certain programs. And then tuition breaks for folks who are New England based, something called the NEBI program can reduce the tuition burden depending upon where the student is attending. And I just want to spend a brief second talking about these. FAFSA Day, you may see me at a FAFSA Day if you live in Western Massachusetts. These are great assistance. Financial aid administrators actually help families fill out FAFSAs, usually on a Sunday or in an evening at an area high school, and it's free, and you get expert help filling out the FAFSA. They are doing them still this year in some virtual capacity, so you should check on that website, fafsaday.org. And then Mass EdCo, I wish we had them here in Western Mass. They're great. If you have them near you, please access them. Yeah, the things you can do now, the only one I would mention here that's most important, you can get the FSA ID right now. Student and parent in the next couple of days over the weekend, get that FSA ID so you're ready to go when you're ready to do the FAFSA. And then I can't say enough about MEFA. Go to their website and check out the MEFA resources that are there, whether you're looking at how do I do the profile, or how do I do the FAFSA itself, or can I listen to Amy's jokes again? Yes, you can. It's all out there for you.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And here's our social media platforms too. We're always sharing scholarships and things like that on Twitter and Facebook. So feel free to reach out to us there. Before we go, we have a couple more questions that we'll answer. Sure. But I also want to let everybody know that our phone number and email address is right here. So if you need help, you have questions about the process, we have college planning counselors at MEFA. Everything we do is free of charge. We are a nonprofit state authority, so we're here to help. And our email address is there as well. So if you have questions, you can send us an email. And of course, Google reviews. If you found this helpful, we'd love to get your feedback on a Google review. And then just logistics, we have recorded this webinar, so we'll email all the registrants the recording. And in the handout section of your toolbar, you can also see a copy of this PowerPoint. So with that, I have a couple more questions.
Right.
One I've been saving since the beginning because I thought it would be a good one. For you, Amy, this particularly, is there a different limit for 2-year degrees for the federal student loans? So if you're at a community college, how much can you
Did you
borrow?
plant that one? That's like my favorite soapbox. Did you plant that question?
No, I didn't, but I did
Don't
save it
I
for the end.
wish, don't I wish that there were different limits for 2 years for community colleges, for junior colleges. What you will find if you're considering community college is that all of the FAFSA regulations are really predicated on the fact that the student I'll give my little spiel about it. The student has 2 parents, happily married, both income earners, maybe 1 or 2 kids in the family, dying to help their kid pay for college. Their kid's going to live on campus at the college that they go to, and they're going to graduate in 4 years. That is how the system is designed. If you deviate from that at all, it is very hard to understand how the rules make sense for you. And community colleges are a great example of that. You, in theory, could borrow your entire undergraduate limit. So for a bachelor's degree, you could borrow all of it in loans at a 2-year school to get a 2-year degree, the way the current regulations are. And there are, yeah, so the short answer is no, there are not different limits for 2-year institutions.
Great, and I'll just put a call out. I know we're almost at 8 o'clock in an hour and a half, which is typically the time it takes to get through this. So here's another good one. And if anybody else has any questions, we'll stay on the line until we answer your questions. But for those who do need to drop off, thank you for coming tonight. So the last question that I have here, and unless we get a few more, when do you reach out to a school about special circumstances? Should you wait until they're accepted or when they decide where they're going?
So the first thing is do the FAFSA first. We often have people trying to circumvent the FAFSA altogether because they know that it is not going to reflect their circumstances accurately. No matter how different it is from your current circumstances, you have to start with the FAFSA. Do that first. Once you know that the school has received your FAFSA, so the student's gotten that second email after submitting it that says it's been processed successfully, it's on the way to the schools, that's when you can contact the schools. Now, we are in October of 2020. I'm sure that many folks who are listening in right now are planning on college attendance for fall of 2021. I promise you, if you contact the schools right now about special circumstances for next year, they're not going to be able to answer your questions. It's really too soon to do it right now. But certainly, it is a question that they can answer about timelines. So you can contact them now and say, what is the timeline for special circumstances if someone is a fall 2021 entrant? Yeah, you should probably wait until they're admitted just to like save yourself some crazy. Is it necessary? I don't know. It's going to depend from school to school. But definitely wait till you've done the FAFSA and then ask the school about their timeline. And if you're asking now, make sure you're presenting it as my student isn't attending until a year from now.
Another question, what is considered investment funds versus retirement funds? What's considered an investment when you're reporting versus retirement?
Mm-hmm. Stocks and bonds, rental property. Those are the main things. I'm not a tax expert and I deal with community college students. We don't get a lot of income and asset information like that. But generally, you're talking about stocks and bonds. You may also be talking about, let's say you own an excavating company and your company has some expensive equipment, things like that. That may be included if you have to claim your small business as a part of it. That's a little bit different from the question, but those things come up pretty regularly as questions. Not your primary residence, but rental property, and then investments like stocks, bonds, things like that.
Great. I'm not seeing any questions, but I'll just leave it open for one more second.
Well, definitely the quickest I ever got through this presentation, Stephanie. As you can see, I like to talk about this stuff. I hope everyone got the information they needed.
Yeah, I'm answering one question on my own, but
Okay.
I'm typing in one, but I don't see any others. So I think we're good for this evening. So I do want to thank Amy for joining us tonight on her own time. I know she has kids at home too, so we appreciate them.
They were so good, right? You didn't even hear them.
Nope. And my cat and dog were good too. So, so thank you everybody so much for coming tonight. Again, we'll send a recording of this webinar out to everybody. Have a great night, everybody. And thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.